Welcome to the Global Discussion. Discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a real treat. We're joined by Ger Roe. Ger, you're very welcome to the show. Before I get into it with you, let me hand it over to you straight away at the top. Tell us a little bit about your journey, designing and art, right up to the sort of boards that you sit on today and the wonderful creative work that you're involved in. So over to you, Ger.
Thanks, Simon. Jeez, that's a brilliant intro. I love the sound of that. So look, Simon, thanks for the intro. I started off by probably being one of these dyslexic people with ADHD that is afraid to hide and all that stuff. And that's what I kind of love about the new generation. They talk about everything, and you kind of hide and all that stuff, and go, oh, there's this art thing that I'm kind of good at, so maybe I can focus in here and maybe something good will come of it. So I went to art college, and I started out really as a designer, and I found that a bit limiting because although I wanted to design, I kind of was in love with humor and emotional stuff, and I wanted to do a lot more, and I kind of found out about this advertising stuff that went on, and because I kind of was kind of going, advertising, that's the stuff that's kind of irritating, isn't it? So I ended up designing and then finding out about advertising and realizing that you need to get a portfolio together, and you need to sort of so I eventually got a job as an art director, as a junior art director, and started going along to award ceremonies, which I think were a really good way to sort of learn about what's good and what's bad, and actually realize that what are standards, and see some of the best people who picked up in Ireland. And I kind of was like, you're able to measure yourself then about where you are and what you're doing right or wrong. And I think that's probably where I probably like a bit of competition, if I'm being honest. I'm probably slightly too competitive in a really pathetic kind of way. And I sort of seen some of the great work produced. I was like kind of going, like, how can I do that? So I think the thing I struggle with most as being an art director was that I wanted to write as well. I think probably wanted to do a bit of everything. So it became a bit of a, when I worked in teams with copywriters, I was trying to do a bit of their job, and I was kind of hoping that they would do a bit of my job. And they were the kind of the best relationships where people cross over a lot. So I'm very lucky to work with people like Ronan Knowlton and Ronan Knowlton. He loved that. Ronan Nolte, Des Creedon, they were just kind of a couple of really kind of standout people who kind of spent lots of time with and produced a lot of really entertaining work. And so I work a lot now with Peter Dobbin, who's one of our lead creative directors. But I don't know if Pete will ever admit this, but he is similar to me, but he's a much nicer guy. But he would question a lot of the stuff I do, and I question a lot of stuff he does, and it's a brilliant way of getting the work better. So I think in terms of that, that neurocreative, he sort of sits in that space of, he's supposed to be a writer, and he's a really good writer, but he's not a bad art director either. But what he is a really good creative, and strategically quite smart as well. So he can step back a lot. And so he's probably we're very lucky to have Pete, and just you sometimes find a groove with somebody that's easy. And I think probably a bit of it is that probably we talk to each other a lot too much on WhatsApp. That's the dodgy relationship that we have deep into the night. We're still chatting about problems on WhatsApp. So one of the kind of standout creatives and publicists, I would say. Yeah. And then I suppose, when you start to have a bit of success, awards wise, when your standard moves up and people start to like the work you do, you get asked to judge, and you learn a lot from judging in terms of standards. And then I got asked to, come and get involved in ICADs. I'm very passionate about the creative industry. I love the idea of ICAD, where it's very simple about like a number of values, in terms of fostering, promoting work and then rewarding people who are doing good work. So you're really putting a spotlight on the best people and the best work to come out of it, because, I have this kind of theory, God, if all the work is better and we're celebrating the best work, the chances are that piece of where I started from the beginning, where advertising became this annoying stuff that nobody wanted to see, that maybe people would actually prefer the advertising to the programs, or that interrupted piece became something that could be enjoyable, entertaining, or even something that might move you a bit. So that's kind of the things I probably focus on a lot, is probably helping strategy to get to places where you can create good work, and then working with teams to make the work better personally in my day to day. That's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
that's
that
what I
makes
do.
a lot of sense. And thanks for mentioning ICAD, obviously for our international audience as well, that Institute of Creative Advertising and Design,
Yeah,
it really is a powerhouse now. I know it's, as all organizations, it ebbs and flows, but it really is promoting what I would consider to be the highest standard of creative work. And it's really good to see that going from strength to strength. I know you've been involved in there for a while, but you also sit on a couple of other boards as well. And maybe we could just talk a little bit about Publicis as well, because you're doing
sure.
some
Yeah.
phenomenal work at the time of recording. You're knee deep in Olympic creative. So
Yeah.
there's lots of great stuff that Publicis have done. It's a well respected name and brand. Maybe just tell us a little bit about your role there.
Yeah, so in Publicis Dublin, I sit on the board in Publicis Dublin, and we've a number of key clients there, Virgin Media, Heineken, PTSB, Irish Rail, and I'm probably not even naming a whole bunch like Gas Networks. There's a whole series of different brands there that we're very lucky to have. I'm probably leaving out loads of brands, and I'm getting really embarrassed by, like today, Vem Spar, Eurospar, so we've had a couple of really good years, but I think our focus, if you look back over time, has always been on creativity. It's always been this really strong belief that if you make really great creative work, that it's actually going to be the point of difference. I think if I'm answering the question directly about the boards and what we're trying to do in Publicis, it's about putting that focus, on brilliant creative work. I think the sort of if you like, the motto or the mantra that we would use is leave a mark for Publicis Dublin. And that is all about sort of, owning that sort of mental availability in people's minds to actually leave a mark, like to try and create a work that actually leaves a mark with people. I mean, it's my theory that yes, you can go out and produce a piece of work and put a huge media budget around it, and you're going to try and get into people's main circuits of their heads but it's a lot easier if the work is really fun, emotional, and really memorable, right? That budget doesn't have to work as hard if the work is really good. So they're the kind of conversations we would have there. I then got asked a number of years ago to sit on the GPC in Publicis Global. So that's the global creative board, which draws together all the top lead CCOs and from all the different markets. And what we then do is we get together a few times every year. We look at all the work from the entire network, and we vote on it, and we try and improve the work, or we look at, whip in progress work, and we basically just try and bring about a standard. I think one of the things that was kind of key for me, and I think it's probably from growing up in Ireland and being Irish, is that as Irish people, we tend to have a bit of a chip on our shoulder, if I'm being really completely honest, that we kind of tend to never really believe. I was actually chatting to a director the other night on the phone, and he's an American guy, and he was complimenting on something or other, and I was kind of just sending him back laughs or whatever, because we're not very good at accepting compliments in Ireland, yeah, I kind of always hear my mother in my ear going, "Oh, would you get over yourself, Mr. Fancy Ad Man?" I would hear her in my ear saying that. So, you don't really dwell on anything very, because you sort of almost, I don't know whether it's an imposter syndrome type of thing, but you sort of think that you probably didn't deserve it in the first place. So I kind of, when I started to rock up to a lot of these GPCs, I went, geez, I am kind of as good as these guys, we are the same level. And so there was a bit of understanding that side of it. You're kind of having the same kind of discussions about the right things. And you're making improvements to things, and they're appreciated by a lot of amazing creatives. So that was sort of, does help the confidence a bit to know that what you're doing locally, and what you're doing in Ireland in terms of trying to help ICAD and the Institute, is that you're kind of talking about the right things with the right people. So I think, look, as a country, Ireland tends to punch above its weight. When it, so I think there's a bit of a fight in most of us as Irish people to try and do that because of the chip. The chip is no harm, I guess is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
yeah. No, I love that, and I love the mother's voice in the ear, the fancy ad man.
Yeah.
But it is great because what you're explaining there is almost a global sounding board, and all of a sudden you go, hang on, this stuff is pretty good. We're up
Yeah.
there, we're on a global stage, and
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned the Olympics again, but we're seeing that as well with the medals that Ireland are winning at the moment in the Olympics at the time of recording, and it is fantastic when you start to realize that, but also bringing together that group of creative people who can actually bounce ideas off each other and push the boundaries even further, which only increases the standards. And it brings me on to something I really want to ask you about, Ger, which is, you were talking earlier about how you started, and I got into this design and kind of like this advertising thing, then realized how to put a portfolio together, etc.
Yeah.
But that route through into becoming sort of a leading creative and getting into the ad space, we seem to have this new creative world now where there's a lot of people that want to be content creators, and then there are some exceptional new creatives coming through. What's your view, or what's your landscape like when you look out over the sort of new creative over the traditional? Because it is changing quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it is and it isn't, insofar as it's funny your description of the content creators, because sometimes you get packaged off into this group of content creators, and they don't sit above each other enough. And that's a very dangerous place to be, because I think if you look at, when, I think when I look at creative people, art directors, copywriters, creative directors, ECDs, whatever, they're always looking to work with some of the best people in their fields. And whilst a lot of people, especially in smaller markets, don't want to be pigeonholed, you do want to work with people who, are just brilliant at one specific thing. So in other words, if you're looking for people who are really good at emotion, or people who are really good at, the most poetic photography, or somebody has a specific illustration style that's incredibly fresh, you're trying to find that, to bring that to your brand, or to try and get cut through, or to try and bring a certain type of personality to the brand. And I think the problem with picking up a camera, it's great for learning and stuff like that, and it's great for putting your idea together. But I think best creatives really understand that they're not the best person to do it. There's somebody that's got to be better at that. There's somebody who's going to do better music than them. There's somebody who's going to voice it. So it's great for hobbling together something that you can try and have a conversation with a client about. But the danger is that you can go from a good idea, a great script, or a good idea, and the execution or the activation is not as strong because you haven't surrounded yourself with the very best people. So it's interesting you drawing an analogy on the Irish doing better. The reason I think the Irish are doing better is because they've got much better people around them, right? They've got much better things in place, much more investment in place to actually start to find out, what is the strategy to winning? Who are the people I need to improve my nutrition? Who are the, it's not too different for, you know, anybody who's trying to create something that has an idea is only part of it. It's the execution and having incredible people to deliver that music. And I think one of the greatest things about now rather than then is that we're in a situation, and COVID made this easier, where we can pick up, we can have a call, like you and I are in different places and we're having a conversation, and anybody can do your music, or anybody, you know, can do your voice or your sound, or anybody can shoot something. And I also think the thing that people don't realize, if the idea is good enough, and you'll see this a lot of with filmmaking, people will sometimes go, I don't need to get paid as much as I might have done on another job, or I don't need to have them, because if this idea is so good, I can actually, this could actually help my career, my portfolio, or the client to realize that there's maybe more opportunity in maybe the next project.
Yeah, and it is good when you frame it in that context. I suppose my mind went to movie stars where they say, "Look, you don't need to pay me. I'll take a cut of the film because I think this is going to be a
Exactly.
good
Yeah.
one."
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, just to, I probably didn't answer the second part of your question around newer creatives and against older.
yeah, yeah,
So what I would sort of say is I think the best creatives are creatives who really don't pigeonhole themselves into being writers, art directors, designers, or whatever. They're kind of multitasker type of people who are really understand strategy and love solving problems. They're like obsessed with solving problems. They can't sleep because they're trying to solve the problem. It's with them. Like I sometimes get in a lot of trouble because, you know, my partner's trying to have a conversation with me and it looks like I'm listening and I'm thinking about something that happened 5 hours ago and going, how in God's name am I going to actually solve that problem? That this, the thing. And I think that's probably one of so there's a bit about solving the problem that's, you know, that might even be a nuance of human behavior, or the way we kind of think, of watching people. So there's something I'm kind of learning more and more about myself, and more as a creative, as I get older, that I didn't even realize that I think certain people look at human behavior different to other people. They look at rooms and the way people interact and behave and the things they say and the way they kind of move. And they're always trying to go, okay, that must mean people are thinking about this in a slightly different way or behaving in a slightly different way. So I think as probably as I get further into my career, the more I'm interested in the strategic approach from a brand, or the reframing of a personality of a brand, and how that might appeal to the consumer. That's the sort of stuff. And then having creative or an execution that can match that, demonstrate or deliver it. If that does that make sense?
it makes a lot of sense, and I like what you're saying because ultimately, I think today it's a much noisier world than it was 10 years ago, and that's
Yeah.
much noisier than it was 10 years before that. And technology comes along, and AI comes along, and everybody's picking up a camera, and there's various channels, and there's traditional media. So it's a noisy environment to, in the inverted commas, the cut through that you need. But ultimately, does it comes back to storytelling? It comes back
Yeah,
to great creative. It comes back to
completely.
resonating with people.
Completely.
Yeah.
That you're completely right. They're all the things you mentioned just are all tools, you know, and they will all improve. But it's exactly back to understanding the problem, or understanding the why, or the job, or what has to be done. And trying to say, okay, well, first of all, we have to define what the problem or the issue is. And then we have to figure out, okay, and so what do we need to do that? And all those other things are just kind of tools. And if they make it faster or simpler, you know, that's great. I still think AI is probably a good bit off. It's really useful for presenting and various bits, and when you might need voices, a multiplicity of voices in a certain way to work on certain things. But I think back to this top end level, you know, of just the really brilliant stuff. it's not getting near there, you know. I was doing a talk for IAPI recently, and I was talking about, you know, that AI should mop up a lot of the stuff on the bottom quite quickly. But actually, you know, when you get up to that finite where the great work is done or the great positioning is done, that the great you kind of really need to have those really smart, in-depth conversations with the right people in the room to try and solve those problems, you know.
No, I like that. I really like what you're saying there. And in certain circles I'm involved in, there's a big conversation about having humans in the loop because of the AI prevalence. But
Yeah.
humans at the core is becoming more and more talked about, having a human at the core of everything that you're doing, because ultimately it's not what you're not looking for, particularly in the creative field, is a mismatch of everything that's gone before that's just fed into a machine that then stitches it together and makes it look new. You're actually
Yeah.
looking for something that's different. You're looking for something that is going to make a difference. And as you said earlier, leave a mark.
Yeah.
You know,
Perfect.
you
Yeah.
know.
No, I think it's and that's the reinvention, is that as soon as we think we've got something cracked, somebody will come along and invert it or say that that's wrong. It's I even love looking at that in society, and that's the one of the funny things is that in some ways society is quite conservative now, in terms of we can't say that, we can't do that, we can't, whereas when it was a bit more anything goes, in the early days, or trying to push the boat. And I was actually having a conversation this morning with some of the global guys about different, even just different markets and pushing out work into different markets. And I spend quite a bit of time in Spain, but we probably have slightly different attitudes from some of the social stuff that's coming in from the States that we're listening to in English, same as the Brits, but the Spanish are slightly different and the French are different again, where they're willing to push it. They're sometimes not as conservative or not as kind of concerned about some of the things that we might kind of be concerned about in terms of the way we might communicate certain things. And you sort of see a lot of comedy dropping away because of that. Unless you can create comedy without having a victim. So there was lots of victims maybe in comedy in the 90s, which became quite funny, which you would see in a lot of satire and stuff like that. If you look at the In-Betweeners, a lot of it is all these kind of shows, and a lot of these things are laughing at themselves, or, the Father's Head, these kind of shows. There was a lot of laughing at themselves, and a lot of that's gone out of kind of humor because it's, deemed to be offensive. So I kind of wondering, interested, because when you step back and you look at societies, um, the way, time went from the roaring, 60s and 70s, and then things tighten up a bit and then loosen out again. I'm kind of wondering, you know, as I'm a much older man, will a new generation sweep in and just go, no, let's throw all that out the window. It'll be interesting to see.
No, 100% it will. And I think you touched on a few really key points there, that because there is the ebb and flows of the societal norms, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and that changes constantly. And then
Yeah,
you've got the cultural aspects that you were talking about, which is, well, if you want something to resonate locally in a particular culture or within a particular language, then there are tweaks and adjustments that are required. Because, people talk about global campaigns, but ultimately there's an awful lot of tailoring that goes on to make sure something lands with a particular audience in a
completely.
particular
Yeah,
country who
yeah.
speaks and understands a particular language, who has been brought up in a different culture. So there's quite a lot going on in there. But I love what you're saying, and it makes me want to ask you a little bit about, as well as that, what else is on your sort of mind? What are you thinking about when you look forward now over the next 6, 12, 18 months? What are you thinking about? What's on your mind? What's on the horizon? What's on the roadmap? How do you go about planning your work? What does that look like in your world at the moment, Joe?
Yeah, it's like, this is going to sound weird, but I think I'm always looking for a bit of a gap or a bit of space because there's so much going on and on the day to day. And that's why I just came back from a holiday, which was wild. I kind of deleted Teams and a few things off and I'm really bad at that. Like, I didn't plug my watch in or anything like that. I'm trying to learn from the younger generation who actually are really good at going, no, no, this is my work time and this is actually my me time. Whereas I kind of grew up with this kind of thing. If you don't put in enough effort, you're not going to get any rewards. It's my parents, you know, again, this kind of, you keep doing it until it's right. Go back and do it until it's right. It has to be right. Nobody wants it half done or done badly. So it's sort of trying to unlearn bits of that so that you can decompress, open up, and actually see newer things and fresher things and get. But I always think in terms of inspiration, you know, it's getting, and this is going to sound like such a cliche, but it's getting back into, you know, bits of art or time to read and time to listen to, you know, things that aren't just advertising, you know, because I think for me, I'm very lucky that I get invited to judge, you know, quite privileged that I get to, I got to judge Cannes this year, which was amazing. And I just think I learned, because we all come into these things with our biases, right? But I learned so much about, you know, from other people, you know, from other markets, from looking at how other people tackle problems, and even just how, you know, what is, I think you mentioned it there, what is acceptable in different societies. So I think that's probably in terms of a playbook to go forward with. It's trying to find space to still be creative, because it's when you step back. Because I think that's the thing that a lot of creatives forget sometimes, is in the role of a creative lead, you have the opportunity to have, you're stepped back enough so that you're not down in the changes, you're not down in the weeds, you're not down in the, I'm like, so that whereas the creative leads are sometimes thinking about the brand and the future of the brand, and they're thinking about the brand problems. So I'd find myself thinking a lot about the personality of the brand and how the brand is perceived, and making sure that it's not drifting, you know, that sort of thing. But I don't know if that's answered your question, but
It does
the
answer
truth
it,
is a
yeah.
bit of trying to find a bit of space so I can still
Yeah.
um
And I don't think anybody said that, and we're 200 or plus episodes in at this stage. So, you know, being able to put space in, it's funny when you need to do something very creative, there's always that sort of hamster wheel of creativity, which is you have to almost create on demand because the jobs are coming in. And
yeah,
yet you're actually more effective when you step back. For me, you know, it is picking up, you know, the paints and the
yeah,
easel. It is going to a museum. It's, you know, moseying around an art gallery. It's
yeah.
things that aren't necessarily connected with getting the job done that actually help to rejuvenate that perspective, maybe that lens that you need for great creative work.
Yeah, it's getting lost. Like
Yeah.
I think the old-fashioned expression was give it the overnight, right? Where you'd work with your partner and you'd write a load of stuff and you'd leave it there in the desk, and you'd leave the office at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, and you might have a pint or two and a bit of a takeaway on the way home, and you know, you'd come back in the next morning and you'd have a look and you go, this is terrible. There's two things in there. That some of the stuff we thought was great last night is like, it's three leaps on. The consumer's not going to have a clue what we were talking about there, even though we thought it was fun. So the overnight piece was the space that you had. Unfortunately, stuff moves so fast now with the help of, you know, digital and emails, and we're all, you know, that we're firing stuff over that has to get over because there's a 2 hour thing and someone's reviewing it and stuff like that. So again, that's why it's good for somebody to have to kind of stand back a bit and press the red button, go, don't send that. Let's have a chat about this. How did we get here? Why is this happening? What's the, you know? So I think that space thing, and it's really interesting to that you talk about, because I think I'm guilty of this, is that I get a bit lost in something that I'm thinking about, which is quite nice because you're you're rooming it out and teasing it out in your mind, um, you know, but it's mostly that problem about, like, I think lots of people, I have this whole theory about, this whole stuff about the neuro thing about, what do they call it? Acetylcholine, and epinephrine, and the three things come together when you're stressed. And it's only when you begin to make a mistake that you get this extra bit of plasticity in the head. So that kind of happens near the deadline time. When you've had almost too much time, but when you get near the deadline, you're like, shit, I can't. And then suddenly, oh God, you're sweating, you're going, I'm not going to get this done. This is a pro. Oh, and then suddenly it's when you're in that stressed state that suddenly a bit of a chink comes. It's almost when you're in that sort of, and you go, oh, that's actually pretty good. That's, or when what we'd sometimes do is write the very worst version. And then you go, actually, if you flip that and make that funny, that's actually really good, So those kind of things kind of come when you're under that, that real kind of what's the word, when the biggest pressure comes on, the plasticity expands and you start to have this ability to just, and I think that's very frustrating for other people, for like when you're working with client service and when you're working with, strategy, when stuff comes quite late, but sometimes there's a very good reason why it's quite late. So I think there's lots of people who are used to working to a deadline. It doesn't mean that you're not working. It just means that you're lost in it and you're thinking it out. It's ruminating in your head, but maybe those bits kind of come together, in that final piece where you just have to do it. It's a bit, maybe to use a bad analogy again, it's like when the athlete has to run that 100 meters and it all comes together in that last sort of 10 or 20 seconds.
Yeah, it's like give me an extra few hours, not impress you. Leave it with me for another week and I'll blow you away. Um, it's that kind of an
Yeah.
approach, yeah. But look, before we run out of time, Jay, I got to ask you, is there anything that we haven't touched on, or is there anything you want to leave our international audience with? We talk to creatives, thinkers, and leaders. That's kind of the sweet spot we're in. Is there any sort of thing we could maybe leave as a parting thought for them?
Yeah, like I think we've seen this advertising piece. We've seen a lot of that kind of work, emotional work. And sometimes I think advertising works on zeitgeist. It's a good match of what's going on. And as we've got, you could say there's positivity. And I think maybe to your point, maybe the fact that we were distracted by the Olympics a little bit, because there's so much media and reporting on news and about elections and about who's getting into power and the wars that are out there that, it's gloomy a lot of the time, and normally, our ways out of that were, to have humor helped us around getting through that stress in the past. I could see Can trying to, reward humor and opening up new categories for humor. I was always a massive fan of what humor could do. Um, so like I'd love if our global audience tried more and more to try and bring it back. I'd love if it just had its, renaissance and it came back in some way. So I'd be kind of asking creatives out there to don't forget it. I remember seeing a piece when we were in when we were judging in Cannes for IKEA, which was Life is Not Like a Catalogue, and where they'd flipped it about being able to sell the product, and then it's just what looks like a beautiful catalog scene, and there's a mum in the background, vomiting in the background, in the background, and it's like, are the dogs peeing on? It looks like the perfect bedroom scene. The dogs peeing on the carpet. And it just gave me such a kick. I was like going, because I looked through so much work, and a lot of it like moved me in certain ways. But this just gave me a good laugh. And God, we all need a bit of a laugh when there's so much intensity, when there's so much sadness in the world. So you're kind of going, don't forget about it. Try and resurrect it. Okay, we can't always have victims, but is there other ways of bringing around humor characters, or is there unexpected ways? Even those more surreal ways of bringing about humor. That's the I certainly would love to see it making a bit more of a renaissance again, because we have an awful lot of very straight work that appears out there. So it'd be great to see it.
There's a great call to arms for all the creatives out
Yeah,
there.
call to arms. Come on, everyone.
Well, look, last thing I want to ask you is if people want to reach out and connect, or maybe have a look at some of this great work that you're involved in, where's the best place to point people to, Joe?
So I'm really bad at I don't have a portfolio. And I think the reason for that is that there's a bit of me that hates everything after I've finished, doing it. Or I see the issues or the problems. I probably just see those and I go, oh, we should have done this or tweaked that, or the grading's wrong and that performance could be a little bit better. Or, you see it every time. So I don't keep a portfolio, but I would have been involved in a lot of the work on, for Publicis Dublin. We were involved in obviously the pub museums work there, that one with Heineken, working with our friends in the pub, are an amazing agency, and Bruno's really pushing the network to do great work. So I think, look out for us on Pub. So if you want to connect directly, obviously I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not going to send you to Instagram because you don't want to see shots of me going swimming. I'm really positive. Or going fishing for salmon. I'm nearly positive you don't want to see that, Simon. I have enough friends and family who've told me that it's impossible to look at, and can I please stop posting things?
Very good. Well, look, on that note, I think that brings us nicely to the end of our discussion today here on the Global Discussion. Before I wrap up, I just want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to this episode of the show. Make sure that you follow, you like, you subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. Go and check out all the great work that Publicis are involved in, and those other organizations that we mentioned earlier on. And make sure you join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Ger. But Ger, it's been a real pleasure to catch up with you again today.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and thanks everyone for listening. And I hope it made sense. God, it made sense. Thanks,
Very
Simon.
good.
Cheers. Mind yourself.